God has given us an incredible gift, our very own lives. Our bodies, our minds, our spirits, each one carefully crafted by His hands. And just like anything precious, what God gives, He expects us to care for. If we truly believe that we are made in His image, then shouldn't we treat ourselves with the same love, honor, and respect that He has for us? Think about it. If someone gave you a priceless treasure, something one of a kind, something that could never be replaced, wouldn't you guard it carefully? Wouldn't you do everything in your power to protect it, to maintain it, to ensure that it thrives? Now, what if I told you that the most priceless treasure God has entrusted you with is you? Not just your talents, not just your ability to serve others, but your entire being. Your body, your heart, your mind, and your soul. Too often, people fall into the trap of thinking that taking care of themselves is a lesser priority, that somehow, in order to be a good Christian, a good spouse, a good parent, or a good friend, they have to keep giving and giving, even when there's nothing left inside them. But that is not what God intends. He does not call us to run ourselves into the ground. He does not ask us to neglect the very vessel He created to do His work. The Bible tells us that our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit, not just a house, not just a shell, a temple. That means it is sacred, it is valuable, and it is meant to be treated with care. When we neglect our health, when we allow stress to consume us, when we push ourselves beyond what is sustainable, we are not honoring the temple He has given us. We are damaging it. And let's be honest. If we saw someone defacing a church, throwing garbage on the altar, or breaking the windows of a place dedicated to worship, we would be outraged. We would say, this is a house of God. You can't treat it that way. But do we have that same level of care for ourselves? Do we see ourselves as worthy of that same protection and respect? Taking care of yourself is not about vanity. It is not about selfishness. It is about stewardship. God has entrusted you with a body that needs rest, a mind that needs peace, and a spirit that needs renewal. When you ignore those needs, you are not just harming yourself, you are limiting what God can do through you. How can you help others if you are constantly exhausted? How can you encourage someone when your own heart is weary? How can you pour into others when your own cup is empty? We see this in Jesus Himself. He was the Son of God with unlimited power and wisdom, yet even He took time to rest. Even He withdrew from the crowds to pray, to reset, to reconnect with the Father. If Jesus needed those moments, what makes us think we don't? Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is take care of yourself. Get the rest you need. Feed your body with what fuels you, not just what fills you. Set boundaries that protect your peace. Guard your heart from negativity. Allow yourself time to recharge. Because when you do, you're not just doing it for yourself, you're doing it for the people who depend on you, and most importantly, for the God who created you. If you don't take care of yourself, no one else can do it for you. If you don't value yourself, you cannot fully give the love and care that others need from you. And if you truly believe that your life is a gift from God, then it's time to start treating it like one. Here's the expanded segment for key point 2 in a seamless and conversational tone. If we ever needed an example of what it looks like to take care of ourselves while fulfilling God's purpose, we don't have to look any further than Jesus Himself. Jesus was fully God, yet He was also fully human. He felt hunger, He felt exhaustion, He felt the weight of the world pressing on Him, and yet He never allowed Himself to be consumed by the demands of others. He knew when to serve, but He also knew when to step away. He knew when to speak, but He also knew when to rest. Think about it. Jesus was constantly surrounded by people who needed Him. Everywhere He went, crowds followed. Some wanted healing, some wanted wisdom, and some simply wanted to be near Him. And Jesus loved them all. He had compassion for the sick, the lost, and the brokenhearted. But even with all of that love, Even with all of that power, he still made time to take care of himself. One of the most powerful examples of this is in Mark 6. The disciples had just returned from preaching and healing in his name, and they were excited but exhausted. Jesus could see it in them. He didn't say, keep pushing, keep working. There's still more to do. No, he told them, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. He led them away from the crowds because he knew that even those doing God's work still need to be refreshed. And then there was Jesus himself. Time and time again, we see him withdrawing from the crowds to pray, to be alone, to recharge. After he performed miracles, he retreated to be with the Father. Before he made major decisions, like choosing the 12 disciples, he spent time alone in prayer. Even on the night before his crucifixion, he went to the Garden of Gethsemane, not to preach, not to heal, but to be alone with God and prepare his heart for what was ahead. Now, if Jesus, the Son of God, needed moments of rest, why do we think we don't? If he, in all his power, knew the importance of stepping away, why do we feel guilty for doing the same? Some people think that resting is a sign of weakness, that taking a break means they're not strong enough, not faithful enough, not productive enough. But Jesus never saw rest as weakness. He saw it as necessary. He knew that in order to give his best, he had to be at his best. And we have to learn the same lesson. Because here's the truth. Burnout does not glorify God. Running on empty does not make you more spiritual. Saying yes to everything does not make you more holy. God is not impressed by how exhausted you are. He is not looking for people who are barely hanging on, trying to prove their worth through constant busyness. No, he is looking for people who trust him enough to rest, who trust him enough to take a step back and say, Lord, I know the work is important, but I also know that I am important to you. Taking care of yourself is not neglecting your calling. It is preparing yourself for it. When you rest, you are recharging your body, refreshing your mind, and renewing your spirit so that you can be even more effective in what God has called you to do. So maybe it's time to follow Jesus' example. Maybe it's time to step away from the noise, to take a breath, to give yourself permission to rest, not because the work isn't important, but because you are. Because your well-being matters to God. Because if Jesus saw the value in taking care of himself, then so should we. Here's the expanded segment for key point 3 in a seamless and conversational tone. One of the greatest truths we can embrace in life is that we cannot pour from an empty cup. It sounds simple, but it's something we often overlook. We're living in a world that demands so much of us, our time, our energy, our attention. And we've bought into this idea that giving until we're drained is a sign of selflessness. But the reality is, when we give without taking the time to care for ourselves, we're doing no one any favors. Not ourselves, not our families, and certainly not the people we are trying to help. If you've ever been on an airplane, you've heard the safety announcement. If the cabin loses pressure, put your oxygen mask on first before assisting others. It sounds counterintuitive at first, doesn't it? We're all taught to be helpful, to put others' needs before our own, especially when it comes to those we love. But here's the thing. If you don't put on your mask first, you'll pass out before you have a chance to help anyone else. And in the same way, if we don't take care of ourselves first, we won't be able to fully care for the people around us. This is exactly why God wants us to take care of ourselves, because we are called to love others as we love ourselves. And if we don't love and care for ourselves first, if we don't honor our own health and well-being, then we're not truly loving others in the way God intends. How can you offer kindness, patience, and empathy when you're running on empty? How can you be present for your loved ones when you are overwhelmed, tired, and stretched too thin? You see, taking care of ourselves isn't just for our benefit. It's for the benefit of those we serve. Whether you're a parent, a friend, a leader, or simply someone who cares for others, You cannot be the best version of yourself for them if you're neglecting yourself. You're only able to give what you have. If your emotional well is dry, your energy is drained, and your spirit is weary, then that's what you'll give, nothing more, nothing less. And that's not what God wants for you or for those you love. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that our worth is measured by how much we do for others. We live in a society that equates busyness with productivity and productivity with value. But God doesn't measure our worth by how busy we are. He measures our worth by who we are in Him. Our value isn't found in our accomplishments or our ability to serve others endlessly. Our value is found in the simple fact that we are His children, created in His image. And when we take care of ourselves, we're better equipped to live out the purpose He has for us. Let's think about this practically for a moment. What happens when you neglect self-care? You become irritable. You snap at the people you love. You stop being patient. You stop listening. Your work suffers. Your health suffers. And then what do you have left to give? Not much. On the other hand, when you make time for rest, for nourishment, for peace, when you take time to fill your cup, you are in a much better position to pour into others. You're able to show up fully, ready to be the hands and feet of Jesus. You're able to serve with a heart full of love, not obligation. We see this principle all throughout the Bible. Think about the parable of the Good Samaritan. The Samaritan could not help the man in need if he hadn't first cared for his own well-being. He had to have the strength, the resources, and the emotional capacity to care for the wounded man. He had to be in a place where he could give. If he had been too tired, too distracted, or too burned out, he would have passed by the man on the road. The same is true for us. We are called to be good stewards of the lives God has given us. That includes our time, our energy, and our health. It includes our emotional and spiritual well-being. God doesn't want us to wear ourselves out for the sake of others. He wants us to serve with joy, with energy, and with love. But we can't do that if we don't first take care of ourselves. So I encourage you today, don't feel guilty for taking the time to rest, to recharge, and to prioritize your own well-being. It's not selfish. It's necessary. It's God's design. And when you care for yourself first, you will be more equipped to care for others in a way that honors God and reflects His love. Here's the expanded segment for key point 4 in a seamless and conversational tone. Taking care of yourself is often misunderstood. In a world that celebrates constant giving, sacrificing, and selflessness, it's easy to think that prioritizing our own needs is selfish. That somehow, if we focus too much on our own health or happiness, we are falling short of the selfless lives we're called to live. But nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, taking care of yourself is one of the most unselfish things you can do. Let's break that down for a moment. When you're constantly running on empty, when you're overwhelmed, stressed out, and burned out, you're not truly able to give your best to anyone. You're operating on autopilot, doing the bare minimum. And that's not the kind of service God calls us to. He doesn't want us to serve others out of obligation or exhaustion. He wants us to serve with joy, energy, and a heart that's full. And to do that, we need to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves first. Think about it this way. If you're constantly saying yes to everything, constantly putting others' needs ahead of your own, you'll eventually have nothing left to give. You'll become drained, weary, and frustrated. And when you're in that place, how well are you really able to love and serve others? Are you giving them the best version of yourself, or are you just getting by? On the other hand, when you take the time to prioritize your own health, your own peace, and your own well-being, you're not being selfish. You're making sure you have the energy, patience, and compassion to give freely and wholeheartedly. You're making sure that when you do serve, you're doing it with a full heart, not a tired one. And when you give from a place of fullness, it's a much more genuine and effective offering. But here's where the tension comes in. We live in a world that tells us to be busy, to hustle, to go, go, go. We're praised for pushing through fatigue, for working through stress, and for constantly doing more. We get caught up in the mindset that if we're not constantly doing, then we're not being productive. And this pressure can make us feel guilty when we take time for ourselves. We start to believe that resting or saying no to demands is somehow wrong. But the truth is, you're not weak for taking care of yourself. You're wise. God never intended for us to be martyrs. He didn't create us to burn ourselves out while trying to serve others. In fact, when we neglect ourselves, we're actually hindering the work God has called us to. We're not able to serve others effectively when we're running on fumes. It's like trying to fill a glass that's already full. You can't pour anything else into it. But when you take time to rest, recharge, and refresh, you're creating space for God to fill you with His strength, His peace, and His love. And when He fills you up, you can overflow into the lives of those around you. Think about the greatest commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Notice how the command to love others is tied to the command to love yourself. It's not love others first and love yourself second. It's love yourself as you love others. You can't give what you don't have. And if you're not caring for yourself, you won't have the love, patience, or energy to give to others. Taking care of yourself is the foundation from which all other service flows. When you prioritize your health, whether that's physical, emotional, spiritual, you are strengthening your ability to love and serve others. It's not selfish. It's a necessary part of God's design. In fact, you could say that self-care is a form of stewardship. You're stewarding your body, your mind, and your soul so that you can be a better steward of God's work in the world. So let go of the guilt. Let go of the false notion that taking care of yourself is selfish. Remember, Jesus Himself took time to rest. He stepped away from the crowds to recharge. He didn't see that as a failure. He saw it as necessary. And if Jesus can take care of Himself in that way, then we can too. Because when we care for ourselves, we're not just making ourselves better, we're making the world better. And that, my friends, is the kind of service that truly honors God. Here's the expanded segment for Key Point 5 in a seamless and conversational tone. God has given us a powerful responsibility, stewardship. We are entrusted with so much more than just our time or our talents. He has entrusted us with our very lives, with our bodies, minds, and souls. And with that trust comes the duty to care for what He has provided us. We are called to be good stewards of all that God has given us, including the most precious thing of all, ourselves. When we talk about stewardship, we often think about managing money, resources, or possessions. But the most important asset we manage, the one that affects everything else in our lives, is our own well-being. Think about it. If we're not taking care of ourselves, if we're neglecting our physical health, our mental clarity, or our spiritual strength, how can we effectively steward anything else in our lives? How can we give our best to others, serve our communities, or fulfill the unique calling God has placed on our lives if we're not first nurturing and guarding the vessel He has given us? The Bible tells us that our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit. 1 Corinthians 6:19-20. That's a powerful statement, isn't it? It's not just saying that our bodies are something to take care of because they're ours, but because they house the very presence of God. Just as we would care for a sacred place, a church, a sacred ground, or something that holds deep value to us, so should we care for the bodies we've been given. Not out of vanity, not out of obsession with appearance or perfection, but out of a deep respect for the one who created us and lives within us. Stewardship doesn't just mean maintaining what we have, but also growing it, nurturing it, and using it wisely. When we take care of ourselves through rest, healthy eating, exercise, and mental peace, we are actively improving the tools God has given us to do His work. When we neglect ourselves, we are not only doing a disservice to our own well-being, but we're also limiting what God can do through us. Think about it. If we're exhausted, if we're burned out, if we're mentally and physically drained, we're not in a position to do our best work. We're not in a place where we can be fully present for others or fully focused on our own relationship with God. But when we are healthy, when we're taking care of ourselves, we're able to do more, give more, and love more. It's like the parable of the talents. In that story, Jesus speaks of a master who gives his servants different amounts of money to manage. Two of the servants are faithful stewards. They multiply what they've been given. The third, however, buries his talent and does nothing with it. When the master returns, the faithful servants are rewarded, while the one who buried his talent is reprimanded. Now, we might not be given literal talents or gold, but we've all been given gifts and responsibilities. Our health, our well-being is one of those precious gifts. If we neglect it, we're not using it wisely. If we're careless with our bodies, our time, and our energy, we are not being good stewards of the life God has entrusted to us. Stewardship also means setting boundaries. When you stretch too thin, when you're saying yes to everything and everyone, you are allowing your resources, your energy, your time, your peace to be depleted. Setting boundaries is not about being selfish. It's about being wise. It's about protecting the resources that God has given you so that you can be at your best when it matters most. Just as we set boundaries to protect our finances, our homes, or our time, we need to set boundaries around our personal well-being to ensure we are in a position to be used by God. I want you to think about it like this. If you're an athlete, you wouldn't run a marathon every day without taking care of your body. If you're taking care of your body without taking care of your body, you wouldn't expect to be able to compete at the highest level without training, resting, and maintaining your strength. And in the same way, if we are called to run the race of life, to serve others, and to fulfill God's purpose, we can't do it effectively if we're not taking care of ourselves first. Good stewardship doesn't just mean taking care of the obvious parts of ourselves, our physical health, our minds, and our emotions. When we're in a place of peace, when we're connecting with God through prayer, worship, and His Word, we are strengthened and empowered to do what He's called us to do. We're able to serve others with joy and clarity. We're able to discern His will in our lives and make wise decisions. But when we neglect our spiritual health, we risk drifting away from our purpose and becoming disconnected from the very source of our strength. Taking care of yourself is a crucial part of being a good steward of your life. When we honor our bodies, minds, and spirits, we are honoring God, the one who gave them to us, and in doing so, we create the space for God to work through us in ways that we can't even imagine. So let's remember that our well-being is a gift, and like all gifts from God, it's something we are called to steward well. When we take care of ourselves, we're not being selfish. We're being faithful to the life God has entrusted to us. Here's the expanded segment for key point 6 in a seamless and conversational tone. One of the most important things we can understand as we go through this journey of taking care of ourselves is that it's not just about us. It's not about being selfish or focusing only on our needs, but rather it's about creating the capacity to give more effectively and more lovingly to those around us. When we take care of ourselves, we are not just benefiting ourselves, but we are also equipping ourselves to love others well. This isn't a new concept. In fact, it's deeply rooted in the biblical understanding of love. Jesus didn't just teach us to love others. He taught us to love others as we love ourselves. And here's the thing, if we don't love ourselves, if we're not taking care of ourselves, then we are limited in how well we can love others. How can you love someone if you don't love yourself enough to take care of your own needs? How can you pour into others when you're running on empty? It's simple. You can't. But when we prioritize our well-being, we are able to love from a place of strength, peace, and joy. And that kind of love is transformative. It's not just about doing kind things for others. It's about showing up fully, emotionally, and spiritually available to serve and care for those around us. When we're at our best, we're able to give the best parts of ourselves to others, whether it's in our relationships, our work, or in the community around us. Think of it like this. If you've ever been on a plane, the flight attendants always give that safety announcement before takeoff, reminding us that in the event of an emergency, we need to put on our own oxygen mask before helping others. Now, that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? You can't help someone else if you're gasping for air. But we often forget that principle in everyday life. We often get so wrapped up in the needs of others, our family, our friends, our co-workers, even strangers, that we forget we also need to breathe. We forget that if we don't take care of ourselves, we won't have the energy or strength to help those who need us most. This is why Jesus often retreated to quiet places to pray and refresh. He knew that he needed to stay connected to the Father in order to serve others effectively. He knew that without that time of renewal, his work would become a burden rather than a blessing. And that's the key. When we take care of ourselves, we don't burn out. We don't become resentful or overwhelmed by the needs of others. Instead, we are filled with the love, patience, and grace that we can then share with those around us. We are able to give without feeling drained, to love without feeling empty. In fact, the Bible gives us a powerful reminder of how important it is to balance caring for ourselves with caring for others. In the book of Galatians, Paul writes, "Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ." Galatians 6:02. But he also says earlier in the same chapter, "For each will have to bear his own load." Galatians 6:05. This isn't a contradiction. It's a call to wisdom. We are called to support one another, but we are also called to take personal responsibility for our own well-being. We can't bear others' burdens if we aren't first bearing our own. And sometimes that means taking a step back, saying no when necessary, and prioritizing our health and peace. Now, this doesn't mean that we ignore the needs of others. Far from it. But it does mean that we must be intentional about how we care for ourselves so that we can give more generously to those we serve. Think about it. When you're well rested, when your mind is clear, when your body is strong, when your spirit is at peace, how much more effective can you be in helping those around you? How much more loving, compassionate, and patient can you be? The answer is a lot more. You're able to give of yourself freely and joyfully without feeling resentful or overwhelmed. This is the beauty of God's design for us. He doesn't want us to neglect ourselves in the name of service. He wants us to serve with strength, with a heart full of love, and with a spirit that's refreshed and renewed. And when we take care of ourselves, we're not just doing it for us. We're doing it for the people we love, the communities we serve, and ultimately for God's glory. Because when we are at our best, we are more fully able to reflect the love and light of Christ to the world. So, as we go through our lives, let's remember that taking care of ourselves isn't an act of selfishness. It's an act of stewardship. It's an act of love, not just for ourselves, but for everyone we encounter. When we take care of ourselves, we are better equipped to take care of others. And in doing so, we fulfill God's command to love one another as He has loved us.